When we think about the Olympics, we often also hear about the Paralympics. But the Paralympic movement have a very different start than the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games starting before Christ, and the Paralympics, officially starting in the 60s, kind of starting in 1944, but you'll see, we'll talk about that. So today, in this video, we'll be talking about the history of the Paralympics. Obviously the video might be a little shorter than our Olympic video because the history is much shorter. And hi! I'm Ava, and this is Caelia, my puppy. Welcome to Ava Sport Talk, and subscribe to the channel if you like historical retrospective on sport. Unlike the Olympics, the Paralympics do not start as a religious ceremony or with sport organizers. It starts with a neurosurgeon called Dr. Ludwig Guttmann. In 1944, the British government asks Guttmann to open a spinal injury center at Stoke Mandeville Hospital near London. At the time, the mortality rate for spinal cord injuries was incredibly high, and patients were often isolated. And Guttmann's philosophy at this point was considered revolutionary, to move from passive waiting to active rehabilitation. Guttmann believed that sport was the best form of therapy, not just for physical strength and mobility, but also for social reintegration and psychological health. He introduced sport into the rehabilitation program to rebuild confidence, autonomy, and morale. In 1948, on July 29th, on the same day the opening ceremony of the London Olympic Games happened, Guttmann organized the very first competition for wheelchair athletes. He called it the Stoke Mandeville Games, and it consisted of 16 injured veterans competing in a single event, archery. At this point, it was very much a local event, and there was no international competition, but it set an international precedent. What started as an intra-hospital competition really quickly became international and professional competition. It had such success that first in 1952, Dutch veterans came and joined the Stoke Mandeville Games, making it technically the first international games. And this showed how quickly it was progressing and how quickly it was becoming an international phenomenon. What is actually considered the very first Paralympic Games are in 1960 in Rome. So this tournament was no longer restricted only to veterans and had 400 athletes from over 20 different countries, all traveling to Rome, and they all competed directly after the Olympic Games. This is one of the events where the Olympics and Paralympics were held in the same city. They were not using the same facilities as the Olympic Games, but they were in the same city. And the Italian swimmer Franco Rossi became an absolute superstar after those games. The Paralympic Games also saw an evolution when it came to the naming convention of the games. It started as the combination of paraplegic with Olympic because the games were only for athletes using wheelchairs. But as the game expanded to different disabilities, the para at the beginning became for parallel. And so they were games that were existing side by side with the Olympics. Instead of paraplegic, it was parallel. And now that is the naming convention we use for the Paralympics, is parallel Olympics, not paraplegic Olympics. So that was just way before. Now it's parallel. The Tokyo 1964 Paralympics were the very first game to establish a logo specifically for the Paralympic Games, which marks the precedent when it comes to branding and marketing for the Paralympics. It helped creating a distinct visual identity for the event, which is still very important now. We still have two different logos for the Olympics and Paralympics. For the first 16 years of the Paralympics, it was only for athletes using wheelchairs. This started to change in 1976. In 1976, it was the very first time that other disability groups were allowed to participate in the Paralympics. In these specific Paralympics, they included athletes with visual impairments and amputees. This inclusion, specifically, also marked the transition from the concept of post-traumatic rehabilitation to elite sport for everyone. The same year, in 1976, they also saw the holding of the very first Paralympic Games in Sweden, and I will not attempt to pronounce the name of the city. I will just write it on the screen because I am terrible at pronouncing names. And this featured Nordic skiing and alpine skiing competitions. The 1988 Seoul Paralympics, or Olympics and Paralympics, mark a turning point when it comes to the organization of the games. They were the very first Paralympics to be held in the same venues and using the same facilities and athlete village as the Olympics. This established the one city, two games tradition that is now actually mandatory and a contractual requirement for the host cities, which means a city that wants to organize the Olympics also has to organize the Paralympics. It does not have a choice. A city can't say, I'm organizing one and not the other, I'm organizing the other and not one. They can't do that, which they could technically do before 1988. That's just not the case anymore. As the recognition and professionalization of the games happened, they found the need for unified governance. And that led to 1989, the creation of the IPC, or International Paralympic Committee, which is founded in Germany to serve as a global governing body, giving the movement a centralized structure similar to the IOC, or International Olympic Committee. A similar situation as for the Olympics, the Sydney 2000 Games were a fantastic success when it came to the Paralympics. They had really good sales for tickets. It showed that there was a huge public interest for the Paralympic Games, but they were unfortunately also marked by a scandal when it came to intellectual disabilities, where basically within the Spanish basketball team, they showed that some of the players didn't have proven disabilities, and they were using that to try and just get an advantage on the competition, which led to a temporary suspension of all of those events until there was stricter testing and classification systems were developed. The London 2012 Paralympics are often cited as the coming of age for the Paralympics because for the very first time, the games were actually marketed as an elite sport, and they sold a record of 2.7 million tickets. They saw a massive increase in TV viewership, and they really proved the commercial and cultural value of the Paralympics. The Paralympics, unlike the Olympics, use a complex classification system where athletes are grouped not just by sport, but also by the degree to which their impairments will impact their athletic performances. The process is continuous, sometimes controversial. It's essential that they do it to provide as fair as possible of a competition, and this system kind of changed throughout time. There's changes every game more or less to it, and there's no real start to when a classification system started, because it just started initially with only wheelchairs, and then they added categories, and it just kind of went like that. So there's no real date where we could say, oh, this started. Although we can find dates for specific groups, we don't have a general, like, oh, this is when the classification system started. It just started at the same time as the Paralympics started. In the Tokyo 2020 and 2021 game, despite the COVID-19 pandemic, similarly to the Olympics, they were still held in Tokyo, just with basically no public. There were over 4,000 athletes participating in the Tokyo Paralympics, 22 sports, and it included new sports, which were para-badminton and para-taekwondo. I live in Korea, I should be pronouncing that word correctly. Para-taekwondo. Because otherwise I'm going to get murdered by all my friends. Today, the Paralympics are the third largest sporting event, directly after the Summer Olympics and the FIFA World Cup. The continued growth of the Paralympics is really a testament to Dr. Goodman's vision and the idea he had. When you think that just this little tiny competition with 16 athletes became what it is today is kind of insane and really cool. I don't know if he's still alive today, he probably isn't, but I'm sure he would love to see what it became. Caelia, can you come up? I'm sorry. She's not going to be happy because I'm going to pick her up for the end of the video. Come on, puppy. Thank you, puppy. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sticking with me throughout the history of the Paralympic Games. I hope you will be watching the Paralympic Games in a month. Less than a month? A month? In a month. And if you like this episode, please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next week for specifically the history of hockey at the Olympics. And finally, may your team score many goals this week. Bye!